Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the outside. What a beautiful day in Aspen. As the voice from above indicated, I'm Jim Crown, chair of the board of the Aspen Institute, and on behalf of my fellow trustees, I want to welcome everyone here tonight, and thank you for helping us make this summer just a fantastic summer. Spotlight Health Ideas Festival, best ever, ongoing from there right through till tonight's summer celebration, and then we finish up with the Bauhaus Festival starting tomorrow night. What an exciting year. Tonight's speakers are going to be introduced by Dan Porterfield. I'm up here to report on a few other things. I want to point out that this is an important year in many ways. This is the 100th centennial of the Bauhaus movement. It is the 70th anniversary for the Aspen Institute. And the Institute really came to fruition thanks to the vision of Walter Pepke coming from Chicago and founding what is modern Aspen, and bringing with him Herbert Bayer, who spent the last 2 decades of his life designing everything from grand architectural buildings to teapots and ceramics as the talented polymath that he was. We are privileged here in Aspen to have that legacy with us, and especially on this campus. And today we had some very exciting news, which I'm really happy to share with you. The legacy of Herbert Bayer has been here, and while respected, not really a point of focus, not really honored the way it might be. And not just the buildings and the design of the campus, but the tapestries, the sculptures, and the paintings as well. Today, the board was thrilled to accept from our trustee, soon to become life trustee, Linda Resnick, and her husband Stuart, a founding gift to create the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies, which will be a new building on campus dedicated to the work and product of Herbert Bayer. It will be out next to the Betcher building, and it will not only be a great repository for Bayer artifacts, Bayer scholarship, but we envision a day when we'll have not just town coming through, rotating exhibitions, but people in the school district, students, teachers, and people from all over here to share that wonderful Bayer legacy that we, more than anybody else on the planet, have the right to present. So I'd like to thank Stuart. Where is your spouse? Right here in front. We are just thrilled to be able to be the home for that gift. I want to quote to you something that is from 100 years ago, The Principles of Bauhaus. This was written by Walter Gropius as he founded the school in Germany, and things were just getting started. One of the principles of the school was constant contact with leaders of the crafts and industries of the country, contact with public life, with the people through exhibitions and other activities. You, 100 years later, Stuart and Linda, have made those principles come alive, and we are honored to be their repository. So with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Dan Porterfield, who is going to introduce tonight's program. Thank you.
I'm not speaking yet.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim, for that introduction and for your exemplary leadership of our Board of Trustees, and for all the ways the Crown family supports the Aspen Institute, you and Paula together, and your extended family, your father, your children, and we thank you also for making the first donation to our new Bayer Center supported by the Resnick family after the initial gift. Thank you so much, Jim, for your contributions, Paula. Thank you all for being here. It's a privilege to be able to introduce this conversation. We're so pleased to welcome and honor the Aspen Institute's 2019 Arts Leadership Award, an architect who defies categorization, the remarkable Frank Gehry. and I'll say just a bit more about Frank in a moment, but let me once again extend the thanks of the Aspen Institute to Stuart Resnick and Linda Resnick, and also to their remarkable curator who's here, Bernard Jazar, for a transformational investment to establish the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies. This investment is of extraordinary vision and value to the Aspen Institute. It will make a difference on the campus, for the Institute, and for the town of Aspen for generations to come. Incredible. Thank you, Stuart. So Frank Gehry, what can you say? An architectural career that spans more than 6 decades. His creations include, among so many others, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. He's earned many of the most illustrious awards in the architectural field, including the Pritzker Prize. Mr. Gehry is the ideal recipient of the Aspen Institute Award in the Arts. He exemplifies what it means to be a seminal, values-driven leader, inspiring innovation across our culture, pushing the limits of what art can do in society. His work will leave an unmatched, unending influence for good, for creativity, for imagination, for hope. Joining Mr. Gehry in conversation this afternoon is another remarkable leader, Jeanne Gang, founding principal of Studio Gang, an architecture and urban design practice in Chicago and New York. Ms. Gang is also a 2011 MacArthur Fellow and Professor of Practice at Harvard Graduate School of Design. We're so grateful, Jeanne, that you're here to moderate this conversation. Please join me in welcoming both Frank and Jeanne.
All right. Thank you very much. And I guess we could advance to the first slide just to move over to slides. Hello, Frank.
Hello.
Hello. I thought maybe we could start with just something we have in common, a very special person, Stanley Tigerman, who is an architect of your generation that was a special friend of mine and yours. And maybe just, if you want to say something about him, he passed away recently and was a good friend of both of ours.
Very special. In my early beginnings, when I looked weird to everybody, Stanley was one of the people that gave me a lot of support and help, and I miss him, and I love him. And I know Margaret's here somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he also did that for me. He gave me support, and we were both kind of a little bit outliers, I guess, in the beginning.
Yeah.
And one thing that Stanley always did was bring me into exhibitions, and I thought that tonight we could start with talking about the smaller scale things and move up to bigger scale things. Because design, I know that you treat design from everything from the very small to the very large. In fact, we're sitting in your design right here, this chair,
Yep.
and they're very comfortable, by the way.
Be careful, because these hook into your pockets. And I've tried to get them to cut it off, and they won't.
So maybe I'll start with this image. I don't know if you can see. 2 chairs, and you know, one of the things that I thought we could talk about here, but maybe you come at it from a totally different point of view, is I've always been inspired by the qualities of materials and what they're capable of. And here we have the cross-check chair on the left, and then the Grandpa Beaver chair on the right, 2 very different materials. One is more refined, the other one's really raw materials. And maybe it's not the materials at all. I mean, they have very interesting, witty names, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about how these designs came about.
Well, before this, I did some work with cardboard. Mm-hmm. And it's too long a story to tell about it. I was designing
I like cardboard.
Yeah, I was designing fixturing for a Joseph Magnin store. And the fixturing got changed regularly at that time. The fashion turnover was incredible. And so I decided that they should make disposable stuff. And I started playing with cardboard. And so if you fold it, it's structural engineering is It's structural, but doesn't look so good. And I was looking at the end of one of my models that I make for topographic. So you layer the cardboard. And I was looking at the end of it, and it looked beautiful. So I decided to go that way.
It's very green too, because it's a, you know, it's a
Yeah.
material that will.
And so then I just went, and then I found that when you layered it like that, it had other kinds of strength. And then I played with it and made curves, and you could get springy stuff out of it. And it
With the beaver chair, you showed this, didn't you, in New York in an exhibition?
well, because that's had nothing to do with materials. There was an architectural gallery in New York that showed Michael Graves' drawings, and Michael was really hot. And the drawings were beautiful, and when that show was over, he asked me to have a show of my drawings. So I sent him 150 drawings, and he sent them back and said, I can't show this shit. So
He said,
I said, fine,
"Shit."
well, we don't have to have a show. He said, well, we do have to have the show because I've advertised it, I've left the space, blah, blah, blah. So I went back to the office and I had some cardboard like that. And I thought, well, screw him. So I started making stuff out of that. And it's bouncy and it's kind of crazy. We only made a few things.
That's great. I love that. I love that it's that's almost like a sketch in itself, right?
Yeah, it was. This was a sketch.
And
And I still have it. It doesn't look as good as that anymore.
well, I think it's interesting that, you know, design, when we talk about furniture, you also designed a very famous design museum at Vitra. And I visited this a couple of times, most recently a couple of years ago, and I was struck by a couple things about it. One was this curvature is the first time we kind of saw that in your work. And as well, this was a project that you did right before you got the Pritzker Prize. And it's this is a weird looking building. Come on, look at this. But it's somehow so beautiful, and inside and outside. So, but because it has the curves, and you know I like curves also, I was curious if you could talk about a little bit about the tools. You know, how did you do this project at the time? It was 1989. What were you using to get this three-dimensional quality and curves such as that stairway? I mean, I read that you were, at one point, you were making models and digitizing them, scanning them basically, and then getting digital output. But were you doing that then?
That was later.
That was later, okay.
If you look at the curve near the top, the middle curve, halfway down you'll see a little kink. And
Really?
so I used descriptive geometry at the time because that's the only way I knew how to draw it. And the contractor showed me that he built it exactly the way my drawings were, and now it was.
Well, tell people what is descriptive geometry, because they.
I haven't a clue. It's just. It was the name of the course I was taking. Anyway.
Like a ruler and the parallel.
I forget. It's so
S-curve.
long ago. God.
By hand.
I was still using T-squares and triangles, and I didn't even get to mainline, I told you.
Oh, yeah.
I never got to that. But, so when that happened, I wanted to find out why that happened and how to prevent that from happening.
To prevent the kink that happened in.
Yeah, I want to know how to draw curves and make a building with curves. And so through IBM, we got to Dassault Systems, who make the Falcon jets, and I saw a lot of them out on the runway, so people here know about them. At that time, they were using a CATIA system to build airplanes and boats and cars. And they had a the software was pretty well developed, but it was very expensive, so an architect couldn't afford to use it, really. Anyway, I stuck my neck out and bought stuff and did it.
Did they, I mean, when you say you bought it, I mean, were they interested in getting the software into architects' hands?
Yeah, but they weren't that interested. They were French, so they didn't, yeah, you're a nice guy, we'll show you. So
Did you actually learn it yourself? You drew on the computer, or did you?
I know, I'm computer illiterate.
Okay, so there were people in the office that play with
Yes,
this and
yes,
going.
and I found people that knew how to do
Okay.
it. And so we just started working with it, and we were doing a building in Spain with a big fish trellis shape. And we were working with SOM, and we were using CAD systems. And the Italian builder we were working with came to see me and said, we can't design these curves. We don't know how to build them. So I said, well, let's try this new system. And he acquired a workstation. And he called me a week later and said, perfecto.
Perfetto. It's so interesting because, yeah, working with starting
So at the
out,
same time that was
yeah,
done,
it's too-
the only use for that was making a Boeing airplane and the fish sculpture.
There we go. But the fish sculpture, which I don't have a slide of, but it is perfectly curvilinear and kind of translucent, and that was for the Olympics, if I remember right.
Well, it was a building
It
that
was-
SOM was doing, a hotel in Barcelona.
Very cool. So tools are also important to you, clearly. Maybe we could talk a little bit about program. That's another one of the things that some architects are inspired by. This image is of the Vitra headquarters, which was a workplace design that went along with the design museum. But then zoom ahead to 2014, and you have this massive building, a workplace for Facebook in Menlo Park. And
I was wondering what that was.
yeah, it's from the top. But I think when I was starting out, I worked for Rem Koolhaas, as I told you.
Yeah.
And with him, one of the things, he's always inspired by how to put different programs together to get something innovative. But I have a feeling you're coming at that from a different place. Maybe how can you take the given program that you get from your clients and see what you can do with it? So I guess the question is really, do you, when you get a program or a brief, as we call it, from your clients, how often do you challenge the brief, or did you challenge the brief for the Menlo Park project, or do you take the brief and then just?
Well, you know a little bit about Mark Zuckerberg because he's in the public realm. So you know by now that you cannot challenge him, his brief.
He knew what he wanted, and
He's,
so what did he want?
well, he came to my office and he wanted a room like my office. So my office was 40, 50,000 square feet. He wanted 10 times that in one room. So that's what this is.
This is a view of it from above, and I visited this too. by
And
the
then
way.
we talked about the roof. I was talking about, about energy saving, and we talked about a green roof, and he heard me say green roof, and he said, can you really put planting on top? I said, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about photovoltaics and things like that. He said, how about plants? And I said, well, it costs another 30 million. So he said, yes. I said, you'll never use it. You'll never go up there. And I was right. He never went. Anyway, we figured out how to make it.
Did he? Okay, so you already had a sense they wouldn't use it, but but he wanted it. How did you come to terms with that conflict? I mean, did you think
I don't
that-
think, you're making things a conflict.
It wasn't.
I don't get into conflict.
Oh, okay.
Like what you're talking about. The client pays for the building.
Mm-hmm.
So you deliver the fucking building.
Okay. Okay. Good one. What about, okay, you mentioned.
But
Yeah.
we did develop the computer system so that you could save money building the building. That was what we did.
To save money in how it's built or the construction.
Yeah, so the tower in New York that we did, 76 stories, there's no change orders on the exterior cladding, which
Right.
has the form in it. So we were able to build it with no change orders. That means a 15% saving.
That is, you don't want change orders. I know that for a fact.
So that's where I went.
Yeah, you had an
That's how I
innovation.
deal with
You
it.
had an innovation in the process and the construction, which I think other architects have taken advantage of too, and you've shared them generously, like these tools that help us to.
Yeah, we trained Zaha and Masha Softy and SOM and
Oh,
I forget who else.
now I know why you don't like conflicts, because the software is all about avoiding conflicts, right? You get the ducts to go in between the beams and no
Well,
problem.
when clients are trying to do something that seems not in their best interest, I try to help them. But
Yeah, and try to get it done on a budget.
yeah,
Key.
but anyway.
But you did mention climate, so I mean, I'm passionate about climate and trying to use architecture to address that. And recently I was teaching a studio at Harvard about how to reuse these buildings that everyone hates, the brutalist buildings. You know, could they be reimagined? Or because there's a lot of carbon embedded into the building already. And I know that you're passionate about it too. So what do we do about, okay, if this building is really that big, what if Facebook goes by way of, Detroit and automobile making and so on, and then you have this gigantic, like 10-acre building empty at some point? What should we do about the carbon? What's a good solution for climate? Or, can it be demounted? Or do you have any thoughts on reuse?
Well, they can rent it because it's just warehouse space.
It's flexible, or
Yeah, it's flexible. Yeah.
It
No,
is.
it's just warehouse space. It's built very cheaply. It's open space. It's not,
They can reconfigure too inside, I take it.
yeah. The interior work is very, they don't spend a lot of money on that.
Probably because they are anticipating change, and I think that's one of the things about workspace today is, like, how do you get that flexibility?
Right. But on the issue of energy saving, we've worked with an engineering firm out of Germany, and they did a study of 300 LEED certified buildings and showed that they were using more energy than normal buildings.
Oh, no.
So it's not so clear. The house we just built for ourselves, my son designed, we put in 9 geothermal wells. We've got all the bells and whistles beyond. We spent 10 times more on the systems to save energy. And it ain't, I can't say it's working yet.
Okay. Oh no! Don't clap. That's bad. That's bad.
No, I think you got to try. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not belittling it in any way, but I
But tell me-
don't think
okay.
we completely know how.
So if it's not technology, if technology is not working, do we have to change our habits, or do we have to?
Well, we have to be more smarter about how we do it. And, some people are doing it. I mean, It means giving up things, but maybe that's what we have to do.
And well, how urgent do you think that this is?
Terribly urgent. Yeah.
It's serious.
Very urgent.
It's like the most important thing we
Like
have to do.
next week or
Yeah.
hurry.
No, I know.
Hurry.
So I'm applaud that you are trying these things out and having a critical mind, because it's no good if it doesn't work. That's for sure.
Right.
But sometimes I think, maybe I'm going to just advance our slides a little bit. These are the photos.
I don't know how much the Vuitton building costs.
Well,
Everything else is on budget.
okay. But I was going to go somewhere else with this, which is to say that both of these buildings are very beautiful, and they've always thought that, and very moving. And so sometimes I think that art has a role to play, and beauty to do with addressing some of the creatively addressing climate change issues, in fact. And I don't know about you, but when I was in school, we weren't allowed to say the word beauty. That was not, it wasn't, it was seen as a cop-out to talk about beauty. But then as I develop my practice and I work, I'm always inspired by things, mostly in nature, but also in art, by this quality. And it's actually now becoming something that we are talking about again in the academy.
It's about time.
Yeah. But so do you use the word beauty in your practice, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I started out from the art side, so I've always thought of architecture as being an art. And my heroes are some of the great artists of the past, like Giotto and El Greco and et cetera, and Michelangelo. They all started out as artists doing paintings, and they all got into architecture. So they brought art into architecture, and I think that's been missing as a value generally.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how you instill that in people. I mean, it's obvious that if people are interested in the art world and buying paintings that accrue value, but somehow the idea that a building does that. And Bilbao has earned the city several billion euros times, I don't know how much.
People are attracted to it,
And that building was built for $300 a square foot, so.
It has this, architecture can be something that people will go out of their way to see.
Well, you see it here, the buyer legacy is being honored, and that's great.
Yeah. Well, what was it that, because when you started practicing, as you mentioned before, there was a lot of, there was modernism, and then there were these moments of postmodernism, like Michael Graves you mentioned. But what was it that made you, was it any exhibition, or how did you let go of pure functional modernism and kind of just let yourself be more creative? And
I don't know that I completely let go of that, but I was upset that we had to go look backwards when the postmodern thing started. And I was giving a lecture, and I don't know, came out of my head like stuff does, and I say it usually. And I said, they were all in the audience, Mikey and all the guys that were going postmodern. And I said, well, why do you have to go back to the Greeks and anthropomorphic? If you have to go back, you could go back 300 million years before man to fish. I had no idea why I said that. And then I started thinking about it and realizing I was looking for a way to express our times with inert materials. And our times was all about movement. And that wasn't, so that's when I started playing with, I started looking at Hiroshige's
Fish.
drawings, woodcuts, and how beautiful they were. I started looking at the carp and the koi ponds and stuff like that. And they're very architectural. So I ventured into that area, and the beginnings were somewhat embarrassing. So we don't have to talk
What do you
about-
mean? Why was it embarrassing?
Well, I made a fish 35 feet long in Italy out of wood with tail and fins and eyeballs for a fashion show at the Pitti Palace. And it was the biggest piece of kitsch I've ever seen. And it really freaked me out. But when you stood beside it, you sensed it moving. There was a sense of movement. And other people asked me about that. Was I trying to do that? And I took credit for it. So then I did a show in Minneapolis, and I cut off the tail, cut off the head, got rid of all the kitsch stuff. And it still worked. So,
So
that's when I thought I could keep going.
That's like toward abstraction from nature, and you call it movement, but that's really an interesting path that I think a lot of other artists share. The idea of pushing yourself too. What you just described was like basically you thought that you kind of failed in a way, but you didn't let go and just stop doing it.
Well, a long time ago, before you were born, I visited the Delphi and the museum in Delphi, and there's a piece there, a statue, the charioteer, and artist unknown, 500 BC.
Wow.
And it made me cry. And I thought, if an artist could make through inert materials like bronze and transfer feelings over 500 years, that's what I wanted to be able to do. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to get there, but I'm trying.
Okay. Well, feelings have something to do with it for sure. And I don't know if you mind if I ask you how you feel about like looking at your career and your legacy. And no, I mean it's feelings, and you must have them about this great body of work that you created.
Well, I don't look back like that, so
Okay.
for what it's worth. But I constantly work from what I think is a kind of healthy insecurity. And, artists who I've known and worked with, and creative people in all fields, do have that. And so I think it's kind of normal when you're facing the uncertainty of a new project
Yeah.
to feel that insecurity. I think that propels you. And so to rest on your laurels is probably not a great idea.
Right. We all hate rock bands that do that.
Yeah, so
But I think that's a sign of a creative mind, just keeping moving forward.
yeah.
And you try different materials too, and different techniques.
I try everything.
Maybe we can shift over to some bigger scale things now. I mean, because in one way,
That's the building
the Spruce Street on the left,
where no change orders. On
no
it.
change orders. Bravo again for that. And then Grand Avenue on the right. So these are buildings on the scale of the city. Grand Avenue, I know, is just groundbreaking, happened this year. And so I'm glad that I got my start from where, my first project was actually a big building with a developer, Magellan. And there's very strict, with this type of building, there's very strict criteria, and there's a lot of constraints and rules. And so I'm just wondering how you feel, how was it to work with this let's say less spatial, really working with this enclosure, the envelope, was it limiting for you, or did you feel that it was a good challenge or liberating somehow?
Well, the Spruce Street building, the developer I worked with was willing to play with me, and the one on the right has had a harder time, but we've gotten to know each other. So the next building that I'm working on with them will be better.
So you acknowledge that there's a lot of constraints that are, it's like rules that are different than a normal.
Yeah,
project.
but they're constraints that are antithetical to what they want to do. But just because they have a pro forma, like everybody, So.
Okay, but I'm just going to probe on this in terms of the scale. One more question, which is, you told me that when you really wanted to do something creative after you started working on the fish, and that you made your office smaller so that you could do what you wanted to. So
That was way before that, but. Yeah.
well, okay. Now you're back up in scale at this, and you have a big office. And why did you want to go to this bigger scale? I'm just going to say I know that you studied urban design early on at Harvard, and I'm just wondering if your practice is getting back towards. Do you want to get back into this kind of urban ensemble, urban design? Is that the reason?
Yeah, sure. I think anybody would, And there are a few clients that you can. I'm doing some headquarters for Warner Brothers in LA, and the client and I are playing really well. And so we're making a very commercial building rise to the level of something I'm proud of.
Excellent. But you still don't you're still doing smaller scale things at the same time. I mean, I know you've done set designs and smaller.
We're doing jewelry again.
Okay. So, all right.
Cognac bottles.
Oh, I like it.
No, I love messing around all that stuff.
I think this type of scale is really something that you probably can tap into, that early urban work. And then I have one more project, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And this is like the most massive urban scale project that I know of yours to date. And it's the LA River Revitalization Project. And this is just a screen grab from the website that you guys put together. I know what a river can mean to a city, and this is a very interesting one in Los Angeles. A lot of people don't even know that Los Angeles has a river. So can you tell why you are so excited about this? I mean, there's no building there. There's no form. There's no cognac bottle, or, it's a big, ugly river kind of in a way.
Well, I was asked by some people, they said they were from the mayor's office, but to look at, they said New York has a High Line, and they're making money on it. And we have a river that's 51 miles long. See what you can do with it. That's true. That's what Stuart knows. So anyway, I took it seriously. I started studying it. It's a flood control project. The idea of using it for recreation and habitat is, you can't ever. And so all of the culture in LA about the river is about using it for habitat. They really still believe it. It's like believing in the tooth fairy. And no matter what you say, they don't. So I've sort of stayed out of their realm. But we studied all of the river for all of its components, for reclamation, health issues, all of the issues that relate to the neighborhoods it goes through. We met with all of there's 17 cities, including LA, So we met with the other 16, with the small town, the mayors, and citizens, and talked about the river and their needs. South of
Sounds like the process like of urban planning, though. I mean,
Yeah, and in the process, I got appointed by the county as the chief planter for the 51 miles.
wow. Okay.
I don't get paid, just, I got a title.
So,
But
is it
the good thing is that we really got involved. And
Okay.
south of LA, down toward where the lowest kink is in that
Okay.
area.
They can't see it anymore, but
Oh, they
they
can't?
can imagine it in their mind's eye.
Oh, I'm sorry. They can't see what I'm looking
Oh,
at.
there we go. Maybe it's on back again. No,
Okay.
there we go.
So at
Okay.
number 24,
24.
23.
It's like
Anyway,
right in the middle.
the mayor came to me with his son. He said, Southgate said, my son is 8 years old. He has a 10-year shorter lifespan because he lives here instead of over there. And so there's pollution in that area from the freeway, and there's no park space. These kids have no park, zero.
Right.
There's a couple of golf courses in the towns, but no park space. And it's hard to acquire land. It's all used by industrial.
Right.
So we figured that the river has to keep going. It's a flood control project. That you can't tamper with it. So we said, why don't we cover it? And at least parts of it, and create park.
So you'd have green space
So
that
if you
spans over.
covered 51 miles, you'd get the equivalent of 3 central parks, and you would join neighborhoods and parts of the city. That would be amazing. But
And that
I don't expect anybody's going to cover 51 miles.
Right.
But in Southgate, where they don't have any park, they get a third of a central park if you cover 10 miles, 3 miles, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so that's what our proposal is. And we're building a cultural center in Southgate to go with it. We're bringing the Youth Orchestra LA and the County Museum and like all the cultural activity, when they hear about it, want to be part of it. And we're getting funded for that by the state. And
It's really, I mean, it takes this kind of, I've found, because I've worked on the Chicago River, that, you know, it has its own challenges, and I think they
yeah,
flush something like 2 billion gallons of wastewater, which is essentially sewage, down the river to dilute it, which ends up down in the Gulf of Mexico. But each river has its own kind of challenges and history. So I'm really so excited that you took this on, and it really takes leadership to get people rallying around an idea that is such a big, in this case, 51-mile long thing that could connect all of the entire city. So
with the Youth Orchestra LA, that's an outreach program where they'll go into the community, bring kids in to teach them music, like the system from Venezuela that Gustavo Dudamel comes from. And the art museum is willing to also mimic that game with art. And the dance group, Benjamin Millepied, has joined us, and he was doing dance. And the other day, the Los Angeles Children's Chorus has asked to be part. So people are piling in, and the nice thing is we're getting funded to do it
that's great.
for the building, not for no fees.
Yeah. Great. Well, I wanted to say, is there anything else you want to say before I open it up to questions from the audience? Because we have some time for
I
that.
think I've talked my head off. So.
I know people are curious about asking you some questions as well. And I think the situation is there's a mic that you can flag down to ask the question.
I'm ready.
You're ready, all right. One up there.
Hello. So my name's Sophia. I know that the 8 Spruce Street building is one of the biggest tallest residential buildings, I believe, in New York. And was that a goal for you, or did it just happen?
How big?
No, the developer asked me to do that, and I made him make it 2 stories shorter than a Trump building.
Why? Why was that?
Well, I knew that this was before he was president. I knew that he wouldn't like that if it was above.
I'm
And it
staying
was
under
out
that
of
too.
deference to him, somebody who I knew and had difficulties with many times.
Good question. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Monique. I'm from France, and I know both of you have worked in France a lot. And I am in love with your building in France, the Louis Vuitton Foundation. I'm just adore it. And I'm so always happy and intrigued when I go there. And I just wanted to ask you, how did you think of it, of the design and of the complexity of the building?
Wow.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
I understand. I can't do it in French. I used to be able to, but not now. The Louis Vuitton owned a building in the Jardin d'Acclimatation, and it was a bowling alley, and it was 2 stories high, and that was the limit of what we could do. And my client wanted to build a bigger building. So I went to the mayor of Paris at the time and talked to him about the history of buildings built in parks made out of glass. And I gave him examples, of that.
Like Kew Gardens and all
Right.
of that.
And so I said, what if we approached it that way? And he liked that idea, so he gave us the green light to do that. The problem with making a glass building is, for an art museum, is you can't hang art on the glass, right? So we had to make a building inside it that was solid, that you could hang art. And so the building outside was kind of a nice slip cover or something. But then I realized that we could use the space in between for sculpture. And I called Jeff Koons and showed it to him, asked him if he would put sculptures there, and he said, ask me right away, I'm ready. And I talked to several other artists, and they all agreed that they would be happy to do that. So I talked to my client, and he liked that idea. So we continued to make this double space. And I don't know if you saw that, but my friend Daniel Buren, artist, French artist, who always overdoes it, put checkerboard colored paper all over the building. It didn't look like my building anymore. And he managed to keep it there for 8 months. And so people thought he had ruined my building.
Do people, that's interesting, because probably people that never saw the building before didn't realize that was an art.
Right. And it turns out I invited him, so.
Oh.
And I knew he would do something like that. He's always doing that. He's always over.
To build on that question, I saw the models that you made for that, and when I was at the Venice Biennale, they were displayed, I think, in the Louis Vuitton showroom. But there was so many different iterations and development. It was a great show of the way that you work. To answer your question, like to see the very first things are kind of small, blocky, very, and then they slowly the models get bigger scale, and they start to incorporate materials. And is that a typical process for you? And how?
The trouble is, in this being in France, it was a problem for them because there's an established Beaux-Arts system, you know about it,
Yeah.
called the esquisse. So the French architects are trained in Beaux-Arts. In the first week or 2 weeks, they create an esquisse, and then they force themselves to build that.
Yes.
And so our first model, my client said, "That's great." And I said, no, wait a minute. We're just starting. And I made 10 more models. He said, "But Franck."
Yeah, I know exactly that is
And
so true. Yeah.
we had a little bit of lost in translation, but we got there.
No, that is very true. In fact, the system to design in France is often by competition. And so on the good side, if you win the competition, they won't change the building. But the bad thing is they won't change the building.
Yeah.
So as you develop things, sometimes good ideas come in late in the process. And yeah, it's nice to co-create something with your client as well and take
But
them along.
most people who have not been closely involved with architecture don't realize the amount of time that the evolution
Yeah.
is. You're creating a system, and it's to their best interest that you evolve it,
Exactly.
because as they themselves see things, they want to say, no, I didn't want it quite like that. So
Yeah.
the evolution works for everybody.
Yes, it works. I mean, in terms of the plan and what's in there, but also
And in terms of cost control as well.
cost control, because you start to develop systematic ways of doing the things you want to do, and that will bring the cost down.
Right. That always happens.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. You guys, there's one here in the middle, and
Yes. While our thoughts are in Paris, I'm curious what you would do about Notre Dame.
no. It's a good one.
Well, I wasn't interested in doing anything with it. I think they should build it back because it's history. I mean, even though the thing in the middle was done by, what's the name?
Vielle,
and it was out of context and all that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I think it means so much. When I finally got to Paris as a young guy, my first trip, that's the first thing I did. I got off a boat, took a car, and went to Paris and went to Notre Dame. I mean, there's something about the history of that building, anyway, was to me, and I think to a lot of people. And
That's another thing we have in common, actually. It was my first real building. I had a lecture inside that building, and it totally changed me because you realize how this building represents the culture and just how incredible it was.
Well, at that time when I went, it was in the late 50s, and in architecture schools, they weren't teaching architectural history. So the architectural history class was 1 hour a week, and it was terrible slides. So the pictures of the Notre Dame and Chartres and Versailles and all those places were terrible, and so nobody really got interested. And then when you got there, the only thing you could do is get angry with your history classes, you know, that
Yeah.
they didn't tell you how great it was.
And I mean, it's interesting because in Gothic architecture, I mean, it was kind of, when I was in school, it was either people who liked Gothic or people who liked Renaissance. And they just divided into two camps. I was definitely on the Gothic side, but I don't know about.
I went to Romanesque.
Romanesque.
Yeah. I liked the toughness of the sculpture and the way it was working with the stone and everything.
And
So I did a lot of, while I was there, I visited every Romanesque church I could find.
Wow. Very good. Okay, another question? Oh, in the middle there.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
I live in Manhattan. I believe it was Balanchine who said that he couldn't understand why New Yorkers didn't spend their entire days looking up as they walked in the streets. But frankly, as I come in from Newark and from LaGuardia, the 90-story chopped-off pencil buildings are obliterating the New York skyline. And try as I will, I can't see the Chrysler Building. I can't see the Empire State Building, really. Everything are non-entities towering above.
I have an apartment in the building I designed.
Okay.
And you can go stay there.
So, as a resident of a studio gang building
Back
and
there.
also a frequent visitor of the Pittsburgh Pavilion, first of all, I have to say it's an honor to be able to hear from both of you this afternoon. And my question is, throughout the 20th century, we saw various grand styles, whether it was Art Deco or international style or brutalism, but contemporary architecture seems more personalized, whether it's either of yourselves or Calatrava. It seems to be a lot more about the architect than the style. And I was wondering, do you see styles coming back, or is architecture going to continue in the style that it's going? I guess I was just wondering, we don't see as many grand architectural styles as we used to, whether it was Art Deco or international. We see a lot more individual architects making their own individual styles. And do you think that that's the way that architecture will continue, or will styles come back?
Well, if we survive global warming, I don't know.
I mean, in one respect, maybe we're too close to it to see that, and if we, fast forward 100 years, there will be something that ties all this work together.
I think what's happened, though, is the communications is so easy that, and we all want to express ourselves, right? Not to copy somebody else. That's the time we're in, I think, in the arts anyway. And so it's hard to think of. I think you'll find there's a school in it somewhere, but I don't sit around and worry about it. But I think using the computer, using the software we have, allowing the curves has changed. And there's a lot of similarity in the work. The Chinese architects certainly are using similar themes as Zaha Hadid's work. And you see a lot of that language, which could only be done because of the computer. And so I think there is, when it settles down, you'll see, and there's always going to be some individuals in the crowd. So.
Yeah. And maybe also as we get more into trying to address climate, the architecture
There's a guy in the back there.
will be more connected. Oh.
How hard was it to convince your client in Bilbao to go with that unusual design? And had it flopped, how would your career have been different? And would you have changed your willingness to do those kind of things in the future?
Wait a minute, you threw it at me too quick.
How hard was it to convince
Okay, let's talk about that.
your client to do that unusual, very creative design? How hard was that?
Nothing. They went through it. They loved it.
They loved
Suppose everybody had said it was terrible, the worst building they've ever seen, and would your career have been different? Would you have continued to try to do that kind of design, or would you have said, I'm going to just go back to the kind of things I did before?
Well, I got a lot of blowback on my work from the beginning, so it never stopped me. I don't think I ever. I mean, I always assumed it is what it is. When I teach students, I ask them to write their signature for me, and then we lay them out, and each one looks different. I said, "That's you. So find that in your work. That's the best you can do. If somebody doesn't like it." A friend of mine, Michael Heiser, artist you probably heard of, who does things in the desert. One night, I was standing out in the desert having a drink with him at midnight, and he said, and I just finished the little house that was I lived in for a while. There was chain link and corrugated metal and all that stuff that everybody made fun of. And he said, did it ever occur to you that if you used more permanent materials, somebody within 2,000 years or so would like it? That building paid off for those baths anyway, so they're happy now.
Yeah.
Woo, lots of people with a lot of questions.
Oh, okay, maybe we should just take one more.
Hi.
You
my name
pick.
Here she is.
my name is Barbara. My home in LA is on the LA River. And when it rains there, it's really pretty awful. But we would have wine parties down there to watch the water rise. And sometimes it would get just a couple inches. You know, it was pretty low down. It was far down, but it would rise up almost a couple inches. In terms of covering that, I mean, my first thought is that the rain wouldn't get in there, but then if it is up at the headwaters, it's a drainage ditch in a way, it is, but how that would affect the design. And the other thing, this is a plea, is that I always took my dog down there off leash and played along the LA River, so when you design, please think of the dogs.
You know, I presented a project, a really nice project, I thought, with a really good developer in Beverly Hills to the planning department. And it was a filled audience of people. And when I finished the presentation, first question came, where is the dog run? And then it was killed, the project was killed because there wasn't one. That was interesting. That was a new issue for me. So you brought it up. We just got a new dog, and we're very involved with the dog, too.
I want to thank the Aspen Institute for making this possible. This has been such a privilege for me to be able to talk with you and ask you all these questions I was dying to ask you all this time, and to share this time with you. And thank you for your generosity and sharing with everyone else. You're amazing.